I knew it would be an interesting one, this one.
Thank you, Ranga. I think everybody knows me. I'm not going to talk for long today. Sorry, am I going the wrong way? Okay, there we go. I'm not going to talk for long today. And what when I chatted to Jess, what I'm going to be talking about is really managing the transition from paediatric service to adult services. And I do need to point out, I am an adult dietitian. I don't have paediatric experience, so I'm not really going to be talking particularly about children. So what I'm going to talk today, as I say, is just really about how we manage the transition. So and that's a great presentation from Ranga talking about development of AKU in children, and you know, what age do we start nitisinone when we've got the sort of the balancing conflict of developing AKU and the risk of nitisinone in a developing brain. So current practice at the National Alkaptonuria Centre is to start nitisinone not before 18 years. And what we advocate until then is a normal protein intake and joint-friendly exercise. I'm not going to talk much more about that, other than to say, because I slightly disagree with Ranga in that I think we're not talking particularly about a low protein diet, we're talking about a control protein diet. So we're talking about a protein intake that meets the recommended intake for, for children and for adults. I think it's always useful to remind ourselves what the recommended intake is. So this is from the UK dietary reference values. So it'll be slightly different in the UK than other parts of the world. But we can see that so we've got the estimated average intake, and if you remember I talked yesterday, I'm going to show a population curve, that meets the requirements for about 50% of the population, or the recommended nutrient intake, which is 2 standard deviations above the estimated average intake, so meets the requirements for 97.5% of the population. And I think we're always quite surprised, I'm always quite surprised by how low it is, because it's much lower than the protein intake that most people have. Okay, interesting if we look at the recommended intake for the adolescent and teenagers, who are the ones who are going to be transitioning to adult services. Actually for boys, adolescent boys, it's higher or as high as for adults, and that's to support growth. Okay, and it also is high in pregnant women, because of also we've got a period of growth. So again, we've got our population, our typical bell-shaped curve. So the estimated average intake meets for 50% of the population, but we have within a population, we'll find there's very different protein requirements. So by moving up to 97.5, which is meets the requirements for 97.5, which is a reference nutrient intake, then we're meeting protein requirements for the majority of the population. So what I want to do is just talk a little bit about strategies about transferring from, because we're not recommending a restricted protein diet in children, but we are, once we come into adult services, then we're recommending a control protein intake, so not particularly low protein intake, but keeping to the recommended intake, not going above that. So as I say, while that isn't necessarily a low, or it isn't in physiological terms a low intake, it is, because most people tend to eat a lot more, it can feel like a low intake. So what I'm going to talk about is really the right time for introducing a restricted diet into teenagers, gaining an understanding of protein intake in food, moving away from a sort of a meat, veg, potato type meal. And one of the things I was asked to was just, everything's high protein at the moment, so I just wanted to slightly debunk the high protein message. So the physiological versus the psychological right time to start a controlled protein intake. And I think those of us that have teenage children know that for teenagers there's a lot going on in their lives. You've got, potentially exams, school, maybe moving away to university. So what is the right time to start adding another level of control, which is a controlled protein intake? I think when we look at other conditions where you have controlled intake, like type 1 diabetes, we know that there is a higher prevalence of eating disorders. So when is the right time to sort of, if you're starting nitisinone, you're thinking about diet going along with that, what is the right time for that? Sometimes if kids are going away to university and they've got to cope with managing on their own, cooking for themselves, is that the right time? So and I do absolutely understand if you're the parent of a child with AKU and you're thinking about the home chintissic acid, but sometimes what we don't want is somebody to start a diet, not to be able to manage it, have a high tyrosine, and for things to go wrong, and then for this diet to be a cause of resentment in a teenager. So I think, when somebody's ready to start the diet, I think is a really important thing to think about. We just started a year or so ago, a young adult, I think was 21 or 22. He'd already been away to uni and he was really ready to start his diet. So I think it's, it's thinking about the young adult's mind as well as a sort of what's going on within the body. Okay, one of the things that I do think is useful though is for our young adults to be gaining an understanding of the protein content of food. I think a lot of people don't understand protein particularly well. We have, as I said yesterday, traditionally used swaps or protein exchanges, and I think a lot of people have said that they found them very difficult to follow. So one of the things that we think maybe for people when they first get transferred over to adult services, thinking about maybe signing up for one of the apps so you can start understanding the protein content of food, not necessarily restricting it, but just saying, oh look, this has got this amount of protein, or that's got that amount of protein in, and understanding the protein content of food. Okay, and what I think, for we talk about a low protein diet, I want to say again that it's not a low protein diet, it's a controlled protein diet, and depending on the kind of diet that you're eating, it can be a miserable diet or it can be quite a good diet. Hopefully you all enjoyed the cookery sessions that we did yesterday. What we were trying to do with the cookery sessions yesterday was not make the meat or the protein the main event. So the recipes that you saw and tasted yesterday were recipes where there was virtually no protein in the recipes that were developed, and then you can add small amounts of protein to that. So if we look at this meal on the left-hand side here, this is your sort of your typical British, it's your roast dinner, it's your meat, veg, potato. So what we've got here is we've got 4 slices of roast beef, that's 150 grams, 160 grams of roast potatoes, and 180 grams of broccoli. Some gravy as well. Would anybody like to throw out into the room how much protein they think might be in that meal? Or we can break it down to the protein in the beef. Anybody like to hazard a guess?
30 grams.
30 grams.
30 grams, 30 grams. Any advance on 30 grams? Thank you for the people who said 30 grams. What about the roast potatoes? How much protein do we think is the 160 grams of roast potatoes? Anybody like to throw an amount out there?
5 grams.
5 grams? And what about the broccoli?
Similar.
So, yeah, probably. We don't count the protein in fruit and vegetables. We count them as a free food. Now, here we've got, this is 200 grams of chickpeas. This is sweet and sour chickpeas, just something I had to have a photo of, but could equally have been a dal, a chana dal, whatever, and 160 grams of boiled rice. Anybody like to throw out how much protein they think is 200 grams of chickpeas? 20 grams? 40
yeah,
in the
45.
chickpeas. Okay, so, and what about the rice? 160 grams of boiled rice, similar amount to the potatoes.
8 grams protein.
So let's have a look. So your 45 grams of roast beef, so 4 slices of roast beef has got about 45 grams. So for most people, that would be pretty much the daily amount of protein. Roast potatoes about 4 grams. Broccoli we don't count, and gravy's minimal. Oh, sorry, it's disappeared, but the total is about 50 grams. That's a very bad graphics on my part. I do apologise for that. Whereas if we look at our plant-based meal, we've got about 14 grams in our chickpeas and about 6 grams in the boiled rice. So you can see that if you had this kind of meal versus this kind of meal, how much easier your diet would be. So what I'm trying to say to people is that if you want meat, veg, potato on a meal, it's miserable because you can get 2 little pieces of meat. Whereas if you make maybe the meat not the main event, so you've got your rice or your pasta and you've got a small amount of meat through that, or you use a plant-based protein, then you can really have a much more normal diet.
Claire, just a question.
Yes, of course.
Go back to the other
Yeah.
slide. How do you calculate chickpeas between unboiled and boiled?
So in this one, I use the boiled
Obviously,
chickpeas.
but
Yeah.
Like, chickpeas do have quite a lot of protein when they're dry, right? Don't they? So do you count? How much do you count for them when they are dry? Do you know that?
Yeah, generally we say for about 100 to 110 grams of cooked beans and pulses, you've got about 7 grams of protein there, depending on the. So you can look at the dry content, and obviously, but if you obviously we eat them cooked, so we tend.
Quite okay, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So you get a lot. So what I would generally say to people, so when we use the swaps, in you've got your 7 gram protein swap, you've got 7 grams of protein in an egg, or 25 grams of meat, but you get about 100 grams of peas or beans and pulses. So even if you have meat in your diet, if you do something like a chili, or cottage pie is quite popular in the UK, if you maybe replace some of the meat with lentils, then it just goes a whole lot further. So it's just about managing your protein intake by choosing the foods that naturally contain less protein, and certainly plant-based, you've got a much lower protein content, so you get to eat more for the same amount of protein. It's just about making the diet bearable, really. I think there's also health benefits to eating more plant-based protein, and Christopher Gardner is one of the person that I was talking about yesterday. It says healthy eating message. What healthy eating message? It's being able to make beans and pulses taste nice, because I think they require a bit more cooking and a bit more flavouring, but I think if you can incorporate more plant-based protein to diet, then you can have a more bearable diet with AKU when on a controlled protein diet, until we've got the tyrosine blockers or whatever else. Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks.
So, and just on that, the other thing that we used yesterday in the cookery demonstrations is some of the vegan foods. And I say that, I learned from the AKU patients, and I think I gave the example yesterday of one of the first patients I ever saw who was making himself a carbonara. So he used his protein, he saved his protein for his egg and his cheese, and then he found a vegan bacon that was quite low in protein. So by using some of the foods that have been developed, as we have lots more people following a vegan diet nowadays, that some of these can be quite useful in AKU as well. So the things that I think are particularly useful are some of the plant-based milks. I will add a proviso then that I think for young people who are still growing, I think it's really important to still include dairy, because it's a good source of calcium, and the calcium in the dairy has got higher bioavailability, even use a calcium-enriched plant-based milk. Some of the plant-based cheeses can be quite useful, though they are quite high in calories. They're based on coconut fat. But I think if we go for the sort of the peas, the beans, the chickpeas, those are great to include in the diet. And some of the vegetables, sausages and burgers, some aren't as good as others. I think some of the mock meat, some of the veggie burgers and sausages aren't as useful, and it really does depend on what kind of protein is made to use them. So plant-based meats can be made from soybeans, they can be made by vegetables or wheat, or they can be made by mycoprotein, so that in the UK we're familiar as corn. So just got an example here. This is a vegan sheet that we've just developed at the National Oil Captain University. I had a student who worked on this. So if we think about a regular sausages, if we had 2 sausages, that would be about 21 grams of protein. So if you went for soy-based sausages, a replacement, you're still looking at about 14 to 18 grams of protein, so you're not really getting a great reduction. If you went for pea-based, then you can get down to about 10 to 18 grams, so it depends which product. But if you use the vegetable-based ones, then you can get down to about 3 to 7 grams of protein. So it really is about looking at the protein source. And if anybody's interested, we have got a vegan sheet, which I'm very happy to share. Looking again at the milks, about the plant-based milk. So if you have a regular dairy milk, 200 mils will give you about 7 grams of protein. And if you use soya, then you're not much lower. But if you use, so yesterday in the cooking, I think they use coconut milk, which is, and rice milk, which have got no protein in. Or if you go for one of the almond or the oat milks, you've got 200 mils gives you about 2 grams of protein. So what I would say, certainly for our young adults, I'd say still have your regular milk, but maybe if you're going out and you're having a hot chocolate or something and you've already had a reasonable amount of protein, then you could start thinking about trying one of the plant-based milks, and they do taste a lot better than they used to, I would say. I don't want to spend ages on this, but just as a quick summary, I think generally I would say that whole foods are better. Whole foods should be plant-based, contain less protein than meat, and they are actually lower in saturated fat, so in terms of your cardiac health, they're quite good. If you look at the alternatives, they may have less protein than meat, but not all of them do. Some of them can be quite high in protein, so it depends really on the protein source. And the plant-based alternatives to milk contain less protein except for soya, but as do the cheeses, but do remember the cheeses are quite high in calories. One of the things that is important that Ranga has pointed out is that we do want to avoid becoming overweight, and if you can avoid becoming overweight rather than become overweight and then try and lose weight, it does make life a lot easier. The other thing that I was asked was just to talk, because I mean everything's protein-tastic now, isn't it? Everywhere you go it's high protein this, high protein that. Do we need, and I think I talked a lot yesterday about protein requirements, and I talked about the fact that the recommended intakes are meeting the requirements for 97.5% of the population. So for most people, even on the recommended intake of about 0.8 grams per kilogram, for most people you're having slightly more protein than you actually require. So what about if we're going to the gym and we're doing exercise? What does that mean? As you remember, I showed this yesterday, and this is what we think is happening. So you've got muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown, and that we have what we call the muscle full phenomenon, whereby the muscle can take up only a certain amount of protein from a meal, and we think that's somewhere around 20 to 40 grams of protein. So if you have more than that, then that excess protein is being deaminated, so the amino groups are going into the urine, and the carbon skeleton is being converted into either energy or fat and potentially stored. So what about if somebody is going to the gym and is doing an extra exercise and you want to put on more muscle? So say we wanted to put on 10 kilograms of muscle over a year, and that would be a lot of muscle, wouldn't it? Probably more than anybody would expect. So muscle is 70% fat. So that 10 grams of muscle would work out to be about 3 kilograms or 3,000 grams of actual protein. So if we think about the increase that we need on a daily basis over a year to put that on, that would be about 8 grams of protein per day. So it's a really small amount. So so what we do when we go to the gym and we're doing exercise is what we're actually doing is probably doing some muscle protein breakdown as well as muscle protein synthesis. So say we said, all right, we're going to double that, we'd still only be looking at 16 grams of protein extra per day. Okay, so that's, as I say, it's about 0.3 grams of protein per kilogram. So we're saying the requirements are about 0.8. You're only increasing that very slightly to put on potential, to give you the potential to put on 10 kilograms of protein over a whole year. So these very high protein intakes that people take, these shakes that are containing 20, 30, 40 grams of protein, what you're probably doing with those is that extra protein is being deaminated and used as a source of energy. So somebody laughed when I said yesterday, so if we think about protein in and protein out, so the excess protein is the amino groups are lost in the urine, so it's what you're getting is the expensive wheat. Okay, but if you're wanting to maximise sort of your muscles and through diet, there are things you can think about. So it's thinking about timing. So if you remember back to this previous one, if you have the same amount of protein but it's equally distributed throughout the day, then you're going to get better muscle protein synthesis. The quantity, yes, is important, but probably the quality and the timing is as important as the quantity. Branched chain amino acids, I was asked a little bit about these yesterday. That's leucine, isoleucine and valine, or ones that are particularly important in muscle protein synthesis. And you can buy supplements, that's what lots of people do, but they're also particularly available in dairy, meat, fish and eggs. So a glass of milk after training for the gym is going to give you a good source of your branched chain amino acids and certainly support muscle protein synthesis. So it doesn't need to be buying particularly expensive products, it's just about managing your diet in a careful and appropriate way. I've already mentioned the podcast yesterday. I think I've overpushed that podcast to the point I've got shares in it. I think we're pretty much done for time, but are there any questions?
Any questions? I actually have a question. Is there any benefit to not mixing your proteins within a meal?
Okay, so that's going back when we talked yesterday about the high biological value proteins and the low biological value proteins, which is how we've tended to class proteins in the past. So your high biological value proteins are your animal proteins, your meat, your fish, your eggs, and they contain all the essential amino acids. And your low biological value proteins are your plant-based protein, and that includes beans and pulses. So we used to say they're deficient in amino acids. They all contain all the amino acids, but they may contain less of some. So rice is lower in lysine, and beans and pulses are lower in methionine. So if you only ate rice for the rest of your life and ate nothing else, you become low in lysine. So in the old days, we used to say, well, you've got to mix. If you're not having meat or an animal source, you've got to have your beans with some bread, or you've got to have so that you don't become deficient. But actually, because we don't only eat rice, or we probably don't need to mix. We're all mixing our protein foods anyway, so it would only really become an issue if you were only going to eat lentils for the rest of your life and never ate anything else. Then you may well become deficient in methionine, or if you only ate rice for the rest of your life. And that's why they're talking now, the classification, that we probably shouldn't be talking about low biological value and high biological value, because once you've eaten a food and it's been broken down to the constituent amino acids, and then your body doesn't care whether that amino acid came from a cow or a piece of broccoli. So we're moving away from advising people now that they need to mix. You just don't want to only have one food for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And then also on a daily basis, looking at the protein intake, some people skip breakfast and things like that. Is there obviously an importance of balancing your protein throughout the day, or is there a negative effect to having sort of like a big protein hit at the end of the evening with your evening meal?
Okay, so it probably becomes more important in people on a controlled protein intake, because on a controlled protein intake, we're saying, all right, we're giving you the amount of protein we think you need. There's a little bit, for some people, there'll be a little bit more protein than they need. If somebody's right at that end that has got very high protein requirements, then we're probably only just about meeting it. So the problem is that if you take all of your protein at once and you surpass what we think the muscle fault phenomenon, the amount of protein a muscle can take up, then you're not going to be using all that protein as protein, you're going to be using it as energy. And if you're not, so it is better to spread the protein out. So, a lot of our AKU patients like to eat just twice a day. In an ideal world, you'd have 3 meals and a protein snack in the evening. But, this is real life, and people don't always eat like that. So lots of people don't do that and do perfectly well. But when we're keeping the protein intake lower, it is better to try and spread it throughout the day.
Fabulous. Any other questions? I think we covered it all. So thank you everybody. One thing I did want to say, that I've noticed that the lads here, this would be relevant for some of the young people within the UK. Mlad is the Clinical Director of Services at the NAC here in Liverpool. So when you're getting your referral, you'll be under his team's care. So it might be worth, I know there's 2 or 3 families here that you might want to say hello and meet at lunchtime, and that would be great. What I'll also do, I will hand out the questionnaire. Obviously we are coming up to lunchtime now. If I can ask that you complete it during lunch, it should only take about 10-15 minutes, and then I'll come and find everybody. But I hope you found that useful, and thank you very much.
If I could would just add that we have got the team from the National Captain Euro Centre here. So we've got at the back table we've got Em and Helen nurses, and we've got Leanne's as well as my lad. So for those of you who are in the process of being referred over, it's a good opportunity for you, so that when you do come to the NAC, there's some familiar faces there.
One final thing, if you haven't collected one of the lovely blue AKU Society bags, we've got plenty, so feel free to pick one up. In fact, where are they? Are they?
They can pick up several.
Oh, you can pick up several.
They all need to go.
One for all family. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. We'll figure this mic thing out here. My name is Jim Fish. I have AKU. I was diagnosed at birth, for those of you who haven't met me. I have a strong Canadian accent, so I'll try to speak slowly and articulate. But the subject we're talking about today is aquatic fitness for the arthritic joints. And we had a fantastic session today with Sean. And I just want to build on what her session was and show you what else we can do when we add a little water to it, if you can appreciate that. I want to start, we've got some acknowledgements. First, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm a terrible speller, but we can work on that. Of course, we've got to thank the AKU Society. We mentioned Leslie Harrison when he was first here, and when we first talked about this presentation, she had actually offered to have a jacuzzi here up on the stage for me, and so I could demonstrate some of the moves like Sean was, and then of course then Natalie found out what the typical outfit for a Canadian aqua fit instructor was, and she thought we perhaps should just stick to the PowerPoint. So thank you for the society, regardless. So I wouldn't be here unless I had an absolute tram full of medical providers. This is a complicated disease, and we need to build our relationships with our doctors. We need to be able to communicate with our doctors, and of course, knowledge is so important. And I'm just lucky because I have a background in orthopedics and in biologics, and so I'm used to talking to doctors, and that's been a benefit to me. Of course, incredible family support. I see many families here, and I see how everyone is able to help and care each other. Unfortunately, none of my family was able to make it here today to support me, but it's not necessary because I know that they're there. And I really want to reach out to Sean Williams because she when I first came here in 2018, she did a chair yoga presentation, and it was fantastic, and it really got me thinking about specific exercises that I should be thinking about for myself. But as a past swim coach, as a past swimmer, past water polo player, my emphasis was sort of more still towards the life aquatic. So, if we can look back to 2018, when I was here with you guys last, I was 53. I was going strong. I had no orthopedic surgeries on the horizon. I think maybe I'd ruptured one or both of my Achilles, but that wasn't. It didn't slow me down too much. And I think the reason is because I had really terrific supportive factors. I had a good diet, learning from everybody here at the IKU. My BMI was quite low. I managed to keep my weight down so it's easier on my joints. In conjunction with that, because I was exercising, I had a good conditioning baseline. And I'm one of those kind of annoying people that's a positive, visual, positive, happy, glass is always full kind of guy. And so when I think back to 2018, I had developed an objective for myself. And there it is right there. I want to be the oldest person in the world with AKU to never have a joint replacement. And that's what I left the meeting with in 2018. So I want to thank you. But the thing is that there's an old saying that when humans plan, the gods laugh. And so as we fast forward to right now, 6 years later, I've had 5 joints replaced. And this is a radiograph of my right hip, which is scheduled for replacement on December 3rd. So much for that plan. But we move on, don't we? We move on. I'd lost 4 inches in spine height, which I miss, although in my mind I still think I'm 6 feet tall. And regrettably, I was reduced to only teaching one in-water class because traditionally there's really 3 forms of aquafit that you can participate in. There's deep water, which is excellent. It's a good cardio workout, but there's zero gravity. You're using a belt, and you can just really get things going, but no gravity load. Wonderful for your joints. You can do short, or you can do shallow water, which is beneficial as well, because if we have osteoporosis, you need to load those joints. And so by having a little bit of contact with the ground, we are initiating what's Wolff's Law, I guess Dr. Ranga would know that, to generate, to slow down the effects of osteoporosis. So, but it's not all negative, I don't think, because, first of all, I became deeply familiar with Amazon Prime and Disney TV. But anyways, so at this point, I guess some of you were looking at this and going, okay, well, geez, Jim, how's that hot tub working out for you, really, if you had 6 joints replaced in this amount of time? And so maybe I could talk to you about it first from an instructor's point of view, and that, as a teacher, I've seen wonderful results, but of course, results may vary on the individual. But we live in a world of snapshots as patients. We have good days, we have bad days, and I'd like to actually go back just 2 months prior to my my left hip giving up, so to speak. But at the time, I was teaching 2 classes a week. I was golfing. I was on the golf course in some form or another, 3, 4, 5 times a week. Very active gardener. Landscaper is really what my passion is building these structures to support the gardens. And with a little bit of preparation, I could walk 20K any given day. We were in Rome last September, had many plus 20 days there. But I think this is the most important thing, is my last point, is that, with my 5 surgeries, I was active. I was either playing golf or I was swimming right up to the day of surgery. And 1 week post-surgery, when you're having a meeting with the orthopedic surgeon, I was already asking about when I can return to sport. So, and I think that has and I like to draw a relationship to that as well, because, we all have, we're probably football fans in here, and we have fans, we've been a fan of them for a long time, and an older fellow might get injured, and you think, oh, that's it for his career, and yet he comes back. And you wonder, well, is it because he had exceptional training? Is it because he had exceptional medical care or physio or rehab? And no, it's just the fact that they are in such tremendous shape at the time of injury. And that's what allows them to recover so quickly. And so that's what I've been advocating, and that's what I teach a lot right now, is prehab versus rehab. Prehab. Get yourself in shape before the surgery so you can enjoy the benefits afterwards. COVID and catalysts. Well, COVID was an interesting time for all of us. For me, the hospitals in Canada were open, and I managed to get 3 joints replaced in 4 years. So that that kind of get me going. But the issue that I felt with, I'm sure everyone in the room is dealing with the exact same thing, is that I have been prescribed literally hours of physical therapy. I sat down, I did an audit, and I had 2.5 hours of daily physiotherapy that I was expected to provide, because I had different, practitioners offering different things, and no one's got time for that, right? And so what I did is I worked with a local kinesiologist and also the wonderful Dr. Perry. Anybody that's been to the NIH has had time. Yeah, she's wonderful, and she helped build me a pool-based fitness program. And the important thing here is that I was still going to the pool, but after having both my shoulders replaced, I couldn't put in the laps, and I wasn't really getting the sort of level of fitness that I was wanting. But I'm already in the habit of going to the pool, so let's figure out a way to use that time productive. And of course, I finished Netflix after my 4th joint replacement as well. So I had to do something else. And so after my 5th joint, that's when I went and in recovering after my right hip replacement 2 years ago, that's when I got my national swim coaching certification and my national fitness and my national aquafit instructions. So I know you're really interested in saying, well, okay, what's going on with the water? But before we get started, it's really important that I think we sort of look back in time and we look across cultures about how warm water has been used throughout the ages. we're here in England, and if anyone's had an opportunity to visit Bath, right here, it's a wonderful representation of the Roman aquatherapy that they used to provide. And I remember when I was there, Dr. William Oliver had a plaque there in 1707, and he stated that if it can't be cured by bathing or by drinking, it can't be cured. So I'm not sure if it's drinking the water or regardless. So we talked about the Romans, and the word spa actually comes from Latin for, sanus per aqua, meaning health by or through water. But the other thing is that the Romans is that they made hydrotherapy synonymous with socialization. It wasn't a solitary pursuit. You go there, you'd hang out with the guys, you do a little bit of workout. Hey, what are you working on? It made enjoying the baths and getting a little exercise into more of a social experience. Across the Ionic Sea, Hippocrates in modern medicine, he said that the way to health is through an aromatic bath and a scented massage every day. I haven't been prescribed that yet. I'm hoping I'll get a doctor that's going to be compliant to his Hippocratic oath. Looking further east, we can look at traditional Asian medicine. And we know that Chinese practitioners, they thought it's very important to use warm water because it helped align the qi flow of their patients. Now we can keep going back. Ancient Egypt, this is the king of Dara, he used boiling hot rocks and put them into cauldrons of water that formed naturally in lava, and he was able to create a hot tub situation there. And so by this, it's not too hard for us to think even further back to Paleolithic man, that after a day of hunting and gathering, that he would usually enjoy to have a nice soak in a hot tub. And they have found cave drawings that represent this. Anyways, before we get into meat, this is sort of important. This always comes up as a teaching instructor, is that before you want to start any fitness program, it doesn't hurt. Talk to your doctor. Make sure you get some medical advice. Talk about what your objectives are. Make sure it aligns with the objectives of your doctor. And because we're visiting our doctors regularly, it's going to be in his notes, and it'll be something that you can follow up on. So you don't want to say, oh yeah, sorry doc, So it always helps to get medical advice. I mentioned determining the lowest barrier to get started and keep going. Obviously, we don't all have access to some of the pool facilities that I have, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it takes 4 weeks to affect any sort of change. It takes 4 weeks to affect any sort of change. And so I just say start easy and then build into the next month, because really, when you're starting on the first month, you're planning on how you're going to be doing in the second month. And we don't want to just burn ourselves out after just 2 or 3 days. So just in looking at without the pool, you can develop effective routines in all sorts of situations. Just simply going for a walk and just asking yourself, maybe I'm just going to walk, maybe not an extra block, but just 2 more squares in the block. And just set yourself personal challenges every time you go for a walk, to walk a little further, or make sure that you're in better posture when you're walking. Gardening, this is wonderful. I mean, you can garden all day. It gets the body moving. You're going up and you're going down, and of course, we get wonderful results from our efforts there. I can talk about watching TV and laying in bed because, believe it or not, I've got some good exercise routines just for that. But that's not the topic for today, and you'll have to get a hold of me later for those ones. But anyways, we're here talking about the water, so let's just jump right in, okay? So when you're talking about aquatic therapy, it's really important to find a situation, to find a location that best suits you. So obviously you have your local pools. Some of you may belong to health clubs that have pool facilities. Anybody have a jacuzzi? We have cheap electricity, so I have an outdoor spa, and it's brilliant. And of course, you can do these same things just at the beach. You don't need to have any sort of, it doesn't need to be chlorinated water for you to do some wonderful exercises. My bias is towards the local pools or the health clubs for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's the socialization, which I talked about, and that's very important that you get into a cohort of people and they all have the same problems. You'll probably be with people that have arthritis as well. But you're going to get in a pool, you're going to get qualified instructors. You're going to get people that can look at you independently. They can, even in a group situation, they're trained to sort of adapt what they're trying to do for your particular situation. So I think that's really important. The other thing, though, about local pools and health clubs is that they usually have some sort of mechanism to make entry into the water easy. They have, I mean, some have lifts and what have you, but most of them have some sort of a ramp, like a wheelchair ramp, where they have just a gradual entry. And so that's what I think is really benefit of these, is that it just gives us better access to get in. So, you know, here's one of them. I'm going to have a couple of AKU pro tips for you here, and here's my first one. When you have joint replacement surgery, get your doctor to take a picture, because you'll want to show that to everybody in your class, and you'll always have the best stories about joint replacement. No one's ever going to beat you. But what about water specifically? And we mentioned this and we touched upon it in different areas, but buoyancy. That's really what sets this thing up. This is a great chart. You see, 50% of our body weight is offloaded in water just up to our waist. And we can increase that to 90 up to our neck. And you can actually do it in the same motion. If you're standing in water up to here and you have 50% of your weight and you go down this low, all of a sudden you've offloaded 90% of your weight. So keep that in mind, because we're going to come back to that. And you know, I love this guy here, but I mean, I can tell you from experience, our AKU joints, they just absolutely love that 360-degree support that's provided. Now, before any specific exercises, though, I want to also talk about balance. And balance is very, very critical. We've all had health assessments, and they probably asked you, are you a fall risk? Have you had any risks of falling? Because falls are very, very expensive to healthcare systems, and they want to avoid that. And so here's another pro tip that I have that was given to an old friend of mine. He's a rehab doctor. And simply, it's your ability to recover from a stumble. That's where you stumble. Is directly related to your level of conditioning on whether or not that's going to turn into a serious fall or your ability to recover. And that's really important. We can talk about some dry land stuff, and I'll talk about some water ways we're going to do this. So let's just think about what our balance basics are. We all know that's a very delicate coordination, that our brain's trying to take these information, these stimuli coming in from our eyes, from the balance systems within our ears, from our neurological system, from our musculoskeletal system. And it's just trying to make sense with all that sort of stuff. But the coordination with that gets lazy, and they stop talking to each other. And that's why you need to practice. But the wonderful thing about the pool is that it's an ideal place to practice your balance. The worst thing that can happen with the classes that I teach are usually probably 65-year-old ladies and above. The worst thing that can happen is that they get their hair wet. So I think that makes it pretty safe. So let's talk about a couple of sample in-water exercises that I like to do. And I'll just do maybe the micro reach, but just a leg lift. We do this in the water, and because the water's there, it's giving us some resistance. So it's making it a little bit harder than usual. But this is very important because it's just building those muscles that we get the leg up enough that we're not tripping on that stair. You know, we're not just stubbing that toe. We're building that up, and we're getting to it. I talk about walking like a model. As we start losing our hip flexors, they start getting a little, they just start working purposefully the way it's supposed to, and we start walking a little bit wider, kind of like a cowboy. So, but that's very hard on our hip joints. And so when in the water, I just try to teach them to, can you hear me, by the way? Yes. Okay. So I'm just trying to teach, walk like a model. Bring that foot in front of the other. Bring it in front of the other like that. And you can do that very easily in a water situation. The soccer-style leg kicks. This is a really important one. When you're doing soccer-style, we have some footballers here, I'm sure. When you're making this motion right here, especially in the water, what we're doing is we're activating the vastus medialis, the BMO, this big sort of muscle right here. And that's the muscle that is just critical for helping our patella track purposefully. So, you know, if we're having some knee pain, it's usually caused by, outside of arthritis, it's usually an imbalance. And so the first place to start is strengthening that BMO, and of course stretching the opposite side. The ballet style or baskets, well, I'm not going to try and do this because it's easier in the water, but it's just a great glute exercise. We're just going to braid out and straight, and you can reach it out, and you can hold that position in the water. Applause, come on, that was hard. You know how long I practiced that. So balance is so critical, and we need to practice that every day, whether or not it's just on a chair or if you have the opportunity in the water. But let's talk about our heart. The the water actually works like anybody that's traveled internationally probably wore compression stockings that you pulled up over your legs. Well, I mean, that's exactly what the water is doing. It is compressing your legs, it's compressing the veins, and it's aiding in the venous blood supply back to the heart. I think we heard that the nerves are the furthest thing from the brain. Well, the feet of the heart is the furthest thing from the heart. And it takes a lot of cardiac effort to pump that blood back up. That's why you see with heart failure, you start to see major swelling down the lower legs. Wonderful for that venous return system. Now, we've talked about heart valves a little bit here, and most of us, when we first get into AKU, we start thinking that, well, I mean, this is a skeletal disease that has maybe some other ramifications down the end. But at the end of the day, we can replace our joints relatively easy. But I'm getting the feeling that now AKU can actually become a cardiac disease that happens to have a skeletal component versus the other way around. So we want to prioritize any action that can raise your heart in a controlled fashion. That's the most important thing. Everybody benefits from improving your general health. And I don't have to go about the studies about longevity, decreasing other disease risks. And it's all just by having some regular exercise incorporated into their life. AKU patients, well, here's something. Because so much of our rib cage is cartilaginous, it can really be affected by ochronosis. And so that's why it's so important for us to be breathing all the time, working on expanding our rib cage, maintaining our pleural cavities so we don't get winded, so we have enough lung space so we can keep going. I think that regular cardiac, this isn't in the literature anywhere, but it just sort of goes to say that if we're working our valves in our heart with a little bit more regularity, that I think they're just going to maintain a little bit more flexibility. That's maybe, Doctor, you can say if that's BS, but it makes sense to me. And another one that's kind of interesting, though, and this is closely related to cardiac, is that any endurance type of exercise, whenever you do a repetitive exercise like just walking or swimming, anytime you get over, it's about a 20 to 30 minute period, but your body starts to naturally reduce synovial fluid, which is joint lubrication. And so, but the trigger for that is movement. And so you have to move if you want to get this free lubrication. Now, what are the key exercises for the aquatic environment? I like to think about anything that targets the big muscles. And we can really build on what Sean told us today on this, but it's the big muscle that we like to do first. It's the glutes, right? That is the absolute biggest muscle in our body. And glutes are especially important in the AKU because, if you ever seen a primate, you ever seen a monkey trying to walk, and you realize they got no bum. And believe it or not, the glute plays a huge role in allowing us to walk comfortably and upright. So it's very, very important. So very simply, we can just do squats, or we can do just a donkey kick, where you're just kicking back like this in the water. Again, we can do this. We can do this on land as well. The quads, I talked about the VMO, but what's nice in the water is that you can do single leg squats and then alternate sides. The problem is when we're doing double leg squats, the stronger leg tends to dominate and we're not getting an equal workout on both sides. So this also identifies where we have strength discrepancies. Lats are the second biggest muscle in the body. We've seen swimmers in the Olympics and how they got that V-shaped sort of torso, and that's all that big latissimus dorsi. So any swimming or rowing motion, anything that's pulling, the lat comes up from the spine and attaches actually to the inside of the arm. So anytime you're pulling that arm, you're activating that lat muscle. I'm not going to go into, and I rarely go into specific spinal and abdominal exercises because what Sean said earlier on, it nailed everything, is that by being in good position, being in perfect posture, the core tends to take care of itself. And so, I always talk about sitting on the bum bone, and like, I don't know if you want to try that or feel back there. You can sort of feel there's a bum bone that protrudes out there. It's called the ischium. And that's where you want to be centered when you're sitting. It's much easier in an aquatic environment because the class that I'm teaching there's it's waist-high water that has a bench in it. So we're sitting on the bench and then we're practicing movements in that area. Sean could have done this thing for me because the abdominals, simply bringing the belly buttons and then shoulder blades down. I've tried to make this simple and consolidate it into 5 Bs, and this will help you sort of remember this on your own, right? Blades, shoulder blades, down and in. I'll talk a little bit about shoulders in a second. The belly, we heard about the fascion. Again, belly button in and towards the spine. The butt, we want to be sitting on that butt bone. It's hard to believe that when you're in your lazy boy and you're relaxing, you're sort of kicking back, you're actually causing stress in other muscles. It's not as relaxing as it seems. It's very hard on your body. And then balance, and of course, breathe. Don't forget to breathe. So that's my 5 Bs, and if you take anything home from this, it's going to be simply this. But where do you want to start? This is a brilliant place. This is called a sumo squat, called Shinko, and it's different from a traditional squat in that your legs are a little further apart, and that your toes are also pointed outwards. This is, if you only do one exercise, this is it. Because when you're holding this position, you're doing wonderful things for increasing your knee and your hip flexibility. The wider stance is targeting the spine, it's targeting your hip flexors. You can move to shallower water and keep doing this routine, and that's like adding more plates onto the squat bench. You can just go into shallower water, you're increasing your resistance. You can add your arms in to a squat. Cup that water and pull that in to add another layer of resistance. And also what I found is that the aqua squat, it's an excellent base for performing other routines. So when we're doing our chair yoga today, we're sitting on the end of the chair. But where I'm teaching, we're in our sumo squat, we're down in this position, and we're performing other exercises from this point, internal, external rotation. And you're engaging way more of the muscles. The nice thing about working in the water environment is that you're working other muscles at the same time as what you're targeting. So I think it's brilliant. It's quite economical that way. What about shoulders? So, a lot of us remember this, but what we fail to realize is that in our day-to-day activities, we are, especially with AKU, especially because of our spines, we have this tendency to use our elbows to support our upper body. So, we can be on the lectern like this, and what's happening? My shoulders are up. We're driving the car, and we got our hand on the armrest and our arm up here, and we're up here. We're watching TV, got our hands up here. It happens over and over again. It happens, actually being in this room and seeing so many people with AKU, I was amazed to see how many people walk with their hands in their pockets to try to keep their body upright. So, and that's still a shoulder thing. So shoulders are critical, and we have to make sure that these are worked. So as I said, from the sumo squat, we can do internal and external rotations like we practice, but we can also do targeted isometrics. Isometrics are where you're contracting the muscle, but you're not actually moving. And to try and do overhead exercises is virtually impossible. And so from that sumo squat position, you can just push against the wall, push backwards, push to the sides, and this is just absolutely wonderful for your shoulder girdle rotator cuff. What we're trying to do, as you see, we're trying to help you guys develop the ability to push up from the chair, because it's hard, right? We've got bad knees, we've got bad hips, and so we're trying to recruit other muscles. And as a matter of fact, in different countries, there's quite a debate orthopedically, because some surgeons believe, we got to take care of the knees before we take care of the shoulders. And other surgeons say, we got to take care of the shoulders before we take care of the knees. I lean towards taking care of the shoulders first, simply because it's everything for mobility. And we all know that first 2 days after surgery and what it's like on one of those walkers, and it hurts. And so having built and done the prehab on the upper body is just going to make the rehab much simpler. AKU pro tip. That's what I meant, is that you have to keep strong arms and shoulders to maintain mobility. But in the water, you can practice this movement of just getting it from the chair, but because if you're sitting in the water and your neck's up to here, you've got 80% of your weight offloaded, it's very easy just to make those motions. Building the triceps, posterior deltoids, it helps you build into it. And of course, you can you can, again, add more resistance by going to shallower water, adding some weights. And Sean talked about this today. I like to use the term functional fitness, though, because we're not going to the Olympics. Anybody? I don't think so. Any world record holders? No? No. So really, we're talking about functional fitness. We want to just be able to just do the things that we want to do. Moving the laundry from the washer to the dryer. You know, what do you got? You got to bend down, go up, put it up here. I mean, that's the same as getting the turkey out of the oven. That's the same as getting the pot from down here. We're always performing those sort of exercises. And so those squats are so important, just simply for that. Picking up a child. I got a couple of new grandchildren, and believe me, I want to pick them up. And that's something I even teach with my students as I lift like this, and they were picking up the baby. You come down, you go low, and we pick up the baby, and we go wee. It's fun. Not the other wee we talked about before. But entering a vehicle or a restaurant booth. Restaurant booth is the #1 source of hip dislocation post-surgery, trying to go in and out of a booth. Believe it or not. So that's why it's so important to have that tissue nice and tight and healthy pre-surgery. Raking a garden. It's just like swimming, isn't it? Just like rowing. We're using those lats, we're pulling. Starting a lawnmower. Oh, we're all electric now, aren't we? But still, you know the ocean. Stairs and chairs. Well, that's what our lives are, really. Is we want to be able to navigate stairs, up and down, and obviously we want to be able to get in and out of chairs. But, you know, we're talking about hot tub yoga, so there's some specific things that happen when we start to heat the water up. First of all, musculoskeletally. The aches and pains reduce so quickly. My hot tub is the same distance as it is to the cupboard where I keep my analgesics. The difference is that I have instant pain relief when I get in the hot tub, whereas I gotta wait 45 minutes for the analgesics to work. And who knows, sometimes the pain would have been gone in 45 minutes anyways. So, that plays an important role in quite often when I'm trying to decide, well, I'm not feeling great, what should I do? I tend to get into the tub. But what happens? With the heat, your inflammation goes down, your muscle become more supple, it makes you be able to do more effective stretches. And we don't talk nearly much about stretching. None of us stretch nearly enough, but the hot water really makes it much more accessible. I think it's a better way to put it. Cardiovascular. So when you get into a hot tub, you know, we sometimes feel a little bit lightheaded, and you think, oh, maybe this isn't good for me, my heart rate's going up. But let's think about really what's going on physiologically. Your heart rate's going up because your body's being exposed to a heat stress. And so it's trying to cool the body. And what it's doing is it's sending all of the blood from your gut and from your periphery from your gut to the periphery to act as a cooling agent. But interesting enough, I like to point this out as well. Your blood pressure, where you think, oh, this isn't good for me, because of the vasodilation, because your blood vessels are getting larger, your blood pressure actually decreases. Metabolic. Well, we've heard about metabolic. Believe it or not, 30 minutes in a hot tub, I've seen 2 studies that sort of covered this, and that just 30 minutes in a hot tub is burning the same amount of energy equivalent to a short walk. So, you know, you can hot tub and lose weight. Hey, look at me. But anyways, another interesting thing I found in the literature here is the stimulation of this unique protein called heat shock protein 70. Are you familiar with there? Anyways, what this is, it's a protein chaperone. And we learned all about how amino acids are used to build and rebuild, and we learned about these enzymatic actions. But believe it or not, there's other proteins that actually guide that and sort of chaperone these proteins and get them to the amino acids and get them to the right spot. And this is stimulated by being in water about 40 degrees for 20 minutes. And they're able to measure that this is increasing. 2 studies that I saw, there's better control of blood sugar. I don't know the mechanism for that. But what I do like to mention about the general vasodilation that happens is that all of the healing factors, the stem cells, the cytokinins that are all sort of drifting around the peripheral, when we get in the hot water, they are all pushed out just with general circulation out to the periphery. So I think we're just putting more of the good stuff where we want it. I'm done. And, you know, with Steve's talk yesterday, so important, mental health and relaxation. This is one of my favorite sayings. The mind is everything. When what you think, it's what you become. But we all know, having a bath, sitting in a hot tub, our stress levels come down. And if we manage to get into a situation where we don't have our phone, then we have time to think. And we have time to plan and deal with our days and congratulate ourselves on the successes that we have. So I want to have some final thoughts. Nick? So I love the first one. Discipline is a promise to our future selves. The things that you're doing today in terms of fixing our diet and improving our fitness is just investing in our future selves. Everything in moderation. As I said, none of us are trying to break a world record, but it's important that we're doing something. And I like this one here. I really want to target this one because I've got a background in medical sales, so it's easy for me, but you need to become the favorite patient of your doctors. I live in a wine region. My doctors all get bottles of wine every Christmas. The staff get flowers. They get coffee cards. I really, really take care of them. When my doctor goes to work in the morning and he sees my name on his patient list, I want him to be happy. He goes, oh yeah, great, Jim's coming in. So I think that's really, really important. Let's take care of everybody, not just our doctors. And so that's it. Thanks for listening. I want to thank, obviously, the Society for giving this opportunity to talk to you, everybody. If everyone has any questions, you can find me on Hot Tub Yoga, actually, HOTTUBYOGA, on Instagram and X, and I'm also there on Facebook. And thank you. So, thank you very much.
That's a wonderful talk. I think we should get you to come and talk to more patients with AKU so that they understand what to do. Fantastic talk. It's quite appropriate because I'm going to talk about the history of alkapnuria. I know some of you might have listened to this presentation before, but there are a couple of new things in there. Hope you enjoy it. It's really a timeline. It's about paying homage to some fantastic scientists in the past, and also blow our own trumpet a little to say what we've done as well, and we can be proud of what we've achieved. So I'm going to start off where the previous speaker left off, in ancient Egypt. So this is Meet Hawa, it's 3,500 BC, 1,500 BC, 3,000 years plus older. And he died in his 30s for reasons that are not completely clear. He was in charge of a granary in Egypt, which means he was probably lifting and carrying things quite a lot. Not surprising that he already had hip and joint disease when they did all kinds of tests in the US when they got hold of this mummy. And they found, interestingly, that he had this characteristic calcification in the spine, which is typical of alkapnuria. That gave them the idea that this mummy probably had alkapnuria. And they took a needle biopsy of the hip and found homogeneous cancer pigment. So this is the oldest patient that we know of with alkapnuria. I am guessing that it might have been even older because it must have been there even longer. And I'm also asking, was there any intermarriage in those days? I think almost certainly, I would think. Because even in modern Egypt, you can see it's one of the highest consanguinity rates in the world. It's about 21 to 80%. If we now move on to 3,000 years later, and there were three publications, if you like, or three mentions for black urine in the context of alkapnuria. I especially find Lusiternus interesting because he described a 14-year-old boy who was submitted to bleedings, laxatives, baths, cold, watery diet, all sorts of things. So the good news for me is they were thinking about treating it even then. Okay, so they were not just ignoring it. Of course, none of these things had any effect. The patient must have been frightened out of his mind for all the evil things that were predicted. None of those things ensured. And he married, had a family, and lived a long and healthy life, always passing urine black as ink, it says, because we don't know what longevity in terms of lifespan was in those days. Probably 30 years was quite a long time in those days. But anyway, we now move to the 19th century, which is quite pivotal, because I think there are a lot of key advances were made in the 19th century, and I'm going to mention a few of those here. Bodecker was a German scientist, and he noticed that the homogenic acid, or the substance in the urine, had reducing agent properties. And of course, some of you chemists might know about Benedict's test, and some of you may know about Nylander's reaction. Basically, those were all tests for reducing substances, and he was the first person to test and find that the urine from AKU patients was able to do that. But he did something even more interesting, which is that he noticed that some urines were black when it was passed, and some urines became black after it was passed. So he got the brilliant idea that he was going to add alkali, because if you let urine stand, essentially it gets broken down and forms ammonium hydroxide, so it becomes alkaline, and that's when it becomes black. And of course, what he did was added alkali and noticed that it darkened from the surface, and for this reason he called alk for alkali, and apton is to suck up oxygen greedily, and and he called it alkapton at that moment, and that's the name for the disease that we look after. And I've been able to reproduce that in our lab ourselves. Both are in the same patient's urine, and on this side I slowly added sodium hydroxide so it didn't mix, and you can see that only the top layer is pigment, and this is the alkapton that Bodecker found all those many years ago. One other thing, of course, in those days you could see patients did discharge themselves voluntarily as well. They didn't wait to be discharged. So before he could chemically identify, the patient said, "I've had enough, I'm going home. Thank you." We now move to 1866. Werco is a very famous histopathologist. And of course, he had the opportunity to do a post-mortem on the first patient with alkaptonuria. Well, maybe the first person to describe the pigment in a patient with alkaptonuria. He was 67 years old, and he mentioned severe deforming arthritis. And what he noticed was all the cartilage and tendon insertions in the body all over were discolored. Okay, and under the microscope it looked yellow, ochre color, and that's why the name ochnosis came into being. He did not know that alkapton and ochnosis were the same condition, by the way. These two scientists, German scientists, are also very important, and they came so close, because they identified that the alkapton was 2,5-dihydroxyphenylactic acid. It's a homolog above gentisic acid, and they called it gentisic acid because of it being a homolog above gentisic acid. And they also showed that homogenic acid came from tyrosine for the first time. They also deduced a series of reactions leading to homogenic acid. Fantastic work, if you can think about what they were up to all those centuries ago. But they got a huge thing wrong. They said humans couldn't make homogenic acid inside the body, and this is all because of bacterium in the gut, which is making homogenic acid, which is absorbed. A bit like Nick Sirwa, he's not here, having his story of the red cabbage and pink urine. It's the same kind of thing that they were proposing in those days. But this had an unusual side effect. So we moved on now to 1992. This is the Nobel Prize ceremony for these two amazing scientists, Michael Brown and Joseph Goldstein. This is Goldstein, this is Michael Brown. He's a physician, he's a scientist, and it's a fantastic story of collaboration between scientist and doctor in those days. And they got this for the LDL cholesterol story, all the things about the statins and decreasing heart attacks, all that was possible because of what the work they did. and they got the Nobel Prize, as you can see, in 1985. But the reason I put this up is because of this. I'm just going to read this out because it's worth it. They said in the late 19th century, that's Bauman and colleagues, so soon after bacteria were shown to cause death, scientific witch hunt began, it says. In frenzied competition with glory and fame, scientists accused bacteria of causing all sorts of diseases. And this is one embarrassing example is Alcapnia, the classic inborn error of metabolism. And they go on to say, before Garrett, the black urine of affected patients was blamed on intestinal bacterium that was said to convert house into homogeneous acid. And to calm this finger-pointing frenzy, the bacteriologist Robert Koch established objective rules by which to indict an organism. So he developed these rules. The bacterium had to be isolated from an affected patient, it had to produce a disease when transmitted to animal, it had to be recoverable from animal lesion. So Alcapnia had tremendous influence in terms of that. And this is Robert Koch, who himself got a Nobel Prize in 1905 for his work. I don't know how many of you know, this is still important. And here you are arguing about Koch postulates and COVID even now, because you have to, these are the rules by which you decide whether something is causing a disease or not, okay? It all started with Alcapnuria, I must say. Okay, we move on now. So Hecker and Wolf were the first to show pigmentation in the eye, and this is important because this is one of the key features to recognize somebody who's got Alcapnuria externally. And that was the first time, so it's a very key observation that he did. We now move to the father of inborn error metabolism, Garrett, Archibald Garrett. And of course, he practiced in London, he worked in St. Bart's, he also worked in Great Ormond Street. And of course, one of the things he noticed was he noticed that you could see he had quite a number of cases, 28 cases in London. And he found it was occurring more often in first cousins, okay? And he was puzzling that over. And then suddenly he found a 2-month-old baby with a discolored napkin. And that made him think this was something that was happening as soon as the child was born. So it gave him the first idea that inheritance was important in disease. And that is the key observation that he made. I mean, he suggested the link between specific enzyme and what he called a Mendelian factor, because he wasn't aware of genes at that time. Okay, it was not known. He also studied other diseases, as you can say, albinism, pentasuria, and cystinuria. He also coined this term, the inborn error of metabolism, while studying Alcapnuria. So very, very special. And you can see even the Nobel laureates always mention Garrett when they receive Nobel Prizes. Garrett himself never got the Nobel Prize. In fact, there's a story which goes that Garrett almost didn't become a doctor because his father thought that he was too thick to become a doctor and he wasn't promising enough, and he was going to send him away to manage the estates in Norwich. But the headmaster of the school intervened and said, no, he's got a lot of promise, let him go, and we've got Garrett doing what he did. The other amazing thing that I noticed at that time is there was a lot of frenzied and heated arguments, if you will, vicious arguments between these two groups. There's a Garrettist and there's the Darwinist. The Darwin basically said that survival of the fittest is through selection, with small variations that increase the individual's ability to compete, okay? So this is suggesting gradual improvement from generation to generation. He also used the example of the giraffe and that its neck grew little by little over time to help it graze on the treetop leaves, if you will. Okay, that's what he was saying. But a lot of people didn't agree with that because they said change, evolution occurs in a leap. Think about COVID. It suddenly appeared. There's no gradual stage to it. It just appeared. Think about Alcapnuria. It just appears. Okay, lots of other conditions. Familial hypercholesterolemia appears because of mutation, change in the gene. Okay, so there was this huge conflict between the two at the time. But of course, now we know that they are complemented. Of course, this is familial hypercholesterolemia, the example that I told you about, and the one that the Nobel laureates were working on. And there was this interesting article in June 2012. So the Blogging the Humans, how Genentech nearly killed off Darwinism, based on what I've just told you. You can see the interesting diaper shown here. We now know both are complementary. So if you grow bacteria in the presence of antibiotics, some of them develop mutations which allow them to be resistant. Okay, so this is Garrett, Mendel, Bateson. Okay. Now, if you grow that in the presence of the antibiotic, all the others die away, and only the resistant ones survive. So that's selection. That's Darwin. Okay, so we now know that both are right. Okay, so you need Garrett, you need the mutation, and then you need a selection process. And if that mutation is beneficial, it hangs about. Otherwise, it's not. I now move on to a key person called Albrecht in Germany. He's the first. He was a disciple of Werker, and he carried out 7 autopsies of AKU patients. He reviewed them all, and then he said the black urine disease and the ochronosis are the same disease. And he was the first person to actually connect the two and produce a unifying thought on this. He also noted deforming arthritis in all the autopsies that he carried out. William Osler was a contemporary of, actually a boss of Garrett, if you will. He was a Regius Professor of Medicine in Oxford at the time. And he was the one who first recognized ochronosis in the ear and the skin and other critical external feature of alkapnia that we rely on to recognize it. Not sure whether you can see the pigment there. Yeah. And there's a little bit of pigment there, but there's something else. There's also, you can see the black wax, earwax. This patient has earwax, okay? Now, it's nearly 30 years later, Neubauer published a 300-page tome describing the full pathway of the phenylalanine tyrosine, including all the enzymes, all the chemicals at the time. So a huge amount of work. Now we begin to get into alkapturia itself now. So Lauder and colleagues in 1958, based in the NIH, by the way, they carried out a liver biopsy from a patient with alkapturia, and they showed that all the enzymes that was described by the previous by Neubauer was found in the biopsy samples, and that the homogenic acid didn't work. Okay, so there's a direct proof that homogenic acid deoxidase enzyme didn't work for the first time. And that's the paper that they wrote. And you can see there, he worked in the National Institute of Health in the US. I'm digressing slightly. So in the early 1990s and 1980s too, Ted Locke, who actually is in Liverpool, by the way, he's based in Liverpool, he was working in ICU at the time, and they developed a drug called nitisinone from leptospermone, which is from the Austrian bottle brush plant. And they were doing this because they wanted a herbicide. But as part of doing that, you have to test and show that it's safe before it can be released into the environment. And you have to test in all sorts of animals when you do that. And when they did that, they noticed that a number of rats and other animals develop red eyes. Okay, and they identified due to the high tyrosine. Then they said, oh, it's because this enzyme in the tyrosine pathway is blocked by nitisinone. And these two scientists and doctors then realized that this nitisinone could be used to treat hereditary tyrosinemia. Okay, this is a condition that was fatal. Babies were dying by the age of 2 years from liver failure, liver cancer. And of course, they tried that, and it worked like magic in the first child, 1991. And since then, it's been the, if you like, a standard of care for hereditary tyrosinemia type 1. Why am I mentioning that? It will become apparent in a minute. So in 1993, the gene for alkaptonuria was actually recognized based on something called heterozygote mapping. The genes that are close together, which are linked, are passed to the next generation during a division of the cell, if you like. So they're linked and they're inherited together. Based on that, he was able to characterize where the gene was. And of course, that was proved by the Spanish group. We have actually worked with Fernando Calon. He helped us with the mouse model that we developed here in AKU. And what they did was they were able to insert the human HED AKU genes into this fungus called Aspergillus nidulans and show that it produced pigment. And they were able to work out all the features of the pigment as well. 1998 is a very important time because for the first time people were thinking about using nitisinone in alkaptonuria. So there's a German group, this Japanese group, you can see it was sent for publication in 1998, so they must have been working on it for a bit longer than that. And they trialed nitisinone in alkaptonuria in a mouse model, and they concluded that NTBC, which is nitisinone, may be a promising treatment for alkaptonuria. Clinical trials would be warranted. Okay. This was taken up by the NIH group, okay, Bill Galt's group, and they say in this letter to American Journal of Human Genetics in 1998, they say, are we ready to cure alkaptonuria? And they answer the question and say, we don't need to cure it by gene therapy at the moment because it's not available yet. The whole genome project has just been completed. They said there's a treatment with a drug called NTBC, which is nitisinone, already available with some dietary restriction phenylalanine and tyrosine. So that was the start of it. And they did some elegant studies in the NIH between 1998 and 2008, culminating in a 3-year clinical trial. And they'll share what happened to that in a minute. By this time, of course, the nitisinone was taken up by Sobi, Swedish Orphan Biovitrum, and it was approved in the US first in 2002 and in Europe in 2005. Okay. And of course, I now move to our own group, so I want to blow the trumpet a little bit to see, to show you what we've done. So Robert Gregory was instrumental in setting up the Eki Society. He was the co-founder. And he set this up in his garage at home. And he had a website which was paid for by Swedish Orphan Biovitrum. They gave him about £2,000. And that was the start of it. And of course, we were very lucky to have Nick here. He's not here, so I can say anything I like. So we've been fantastic. So he's been absolutely amazing. I mean, we were so lucky to have Nick Sirro. His dynamic approach and activism is... it's irreplaceable, and I think a lot of the things we've done is due to him. And the three of us got going in terms of offering something for AKU patients in the UK, because there's nothing at the moment when we began. The first thing we carried out was a post-mortem study. Very fortunate to have patients who donate their body for medical research, and that gave us a research director. That's in 2005. Remember, I said the NIH was already trialing nitisinone, so we wanted to be ready to offer nitisinone to our patients when it became available. But we didn't know very many patients because we started with only 4 patients that we know of. Nick had 2 children, and Robert had his sister, and it was only the 4 that we knew about. So we carried out a population identification program in the UK. So 16,000 GP questionnaires were posted. And from that, our numbers increased to 79 within a couple of years. Okay, there's no national registry for any rare disease or any disease in the UK. Okay, it's a shame, isn't it? Because if you're diagnosed with alkaptonuria and you're not registered somewhere, that diagnosis is forgotten about, and people turn up 30, 40 years later with significant disease. We became interested in alkaptonuria. Professor Jim Gallagher from the University of Liverpool and now Professor George Bougaris are leading the basic science side of it in Liverpool. And the very first thing that we developed was a cell model of pigmentation, okay, because we wanted to understand alkaptonuria and see how nitisinone worked, and that was achieved in 2008. Now, 2008 also was a disastrous year because the NIH trial reported and they said it was inconclusive. It didn't work. Okay, they used lateral rotation of the hip as the only endpoint to decide whether nitisinone was successful or not. They showed remarkable efficacy of nitisinone in terms of decreasing homogenic acid by 95%. Okay, yet the FDA don't like metabolic endpoints. They want a hard endpoint. Because of that, it wasn't approved in the US. But we took on the role of developing it because we were convinced it should work based on what it did in terms of the homogeneous acid lowering. And we also began a natural history study because he said if the lateral rotation of the hip is not a good enough endpoint, then let's try and develop our own. And we developed something called the Alkapnia Severity Score Index, which we then went with for our clinical studies. By this time, we also wanted to prove that nitisinone could stop the pigmentation process. So again, in the mouse, we were able to show that it was effective not just in lowering the homogeneous acid, but in also modifying the disease process. Completely stopped the pigmentation. And some of you who were there earlier might remember the figure that I showed you in terms of the pigment. By this time, we were quite credible in the UK because we had the animal model, we had the Alkapnia Severity Score Index, we understood things better, we had started seeing patients, we knew where the patients were. So because of all this, we were not quite credible. And due to that, the NHS England highly specialized services allowed us to use nitisinone off-label in AKU. And you can see that the date, it was, I received this letter 5th of March 2012. And in the same letter, they said it's commissioned from April 2012, April Fool's Day. And the first patients came through the door in June. So, and since then, we have been doing nitisinone therapy in the National Alkaptonuria Centre. Again, March, April, May, June, fantastic for us in 2012 because at the same time, we also were lucky for the European Commission to give us €6 million to carry a series of clinical trials to develop nitisinone for AKU. Okay, and that was approved, as you can see there, on the 20th of April 2012. Okay. This is the group that carried out the Developer Cure, and these are the sponsors, the hospital and the university. These are the clinical sites that carried out. This is Pištany in Slovakia. This is Paris, Necker, and this is the Royal Liverpool Hospital. And these were the 4 laboratories that carried out the hospital, the University of Siena, the Nordic Biocenter at Copenhagen, and Bratislava for the genetics. Swedish Orphan Biovitrum was the pharma company that supported us. And the clinical trial experts were the PSR in Amsterdam. And of course, we can't forget about the Alkaptonuria societies, both in the UK and Liverpool, absolutely key to ensure enrollment and management of the clinical trial over this stressful 5 years, 6 years of Developer Cure. The first study reported in 2014, it was called the SONIA-1, Suitability of Nitisinone Alkaptonuria. It's a dose-finding study. Because the NIH, when I carried out the clinical trial, they had done a proper full dose response, and in here we found that 8 milligrams of nitisinone was most efficacious. It was also very safe. We also began the SONIA-2 based on that dose. We went for 10 milligrams, which was a capsule, whereas the 8 milligram was a liquid formulation unsuitable for a clinical trial. And we recruited 138 patients, 69 and 69 or untreated. It was the largest clinical trial, we are told, ever in this area in the inherited metabolic medicine field. Again, I mentioned SOPHIA previously, which is the subclinical occurrence features, really to see whether the pigment, when it started, and we found it started quite early, before the age of 20, so early treatment of nitisinone is important. And of course, SOLID 2 was completed in 2019, and we showed that nitisinone was very good in terms of lowering the homogenic acid. Interestingly, it reversed the occurrence, it didn't just arrest it. Very helpful for those who come with advanced nitisinone. There's some reversal of this pigment process. And more important, there was significant slowing of the disease. So all in all, a trifecta of results there, which allowed the European Medicines Agency to give us a good result. This is the publication in the Lancet Diabetes Endocrinology. By this time, we were already seeing problems with nitisinone because we had the National Cancer Center and we'd done the SONIA 2 clinical trials. We were realizing the high tyrosine is an issue here. We were already thinking about more perfect therapies, gene therapy, mRNA therapy, and others. And the question then was, do we need to correct the liver and the kidney homogenic acid dioxygenase enzyme, because those are the two organs where this enzyme is expressed in AKU in humans. Professor George Bougalis developed a special model where the defect was only in the liver, but not the kidney, and showed that the liver was enough to produce all of the consequences of alkapniuria. 2020, European Medicines Agency approves nitisinone as the first treatment for alkapniuria. Again, you can see it's adult patients. Okay, so nitisinone for children is now an important focus for us. And these are the unwanted consequences of thalassemia. The corneal keratopathy, which is a red eye syndrome, a bit like having conjunctivitis, painful, and vitiligo, again, both of these are due to tyrosine. We also found cataracts in people with AK for the first time. And Parkinson's disease is 20 times more common, but this is mostly due to homogenic acid. The tyrosine is just supportive act, if you will, in there. And of course, you've got a problem with the long-term low protein diet, the inconvenience of it. But also, people are still malnourished while they are on nitisinone because of low protein diet requirements there. To deal with this, we are now doing the following. So we are developing tyrosine absorption inhibitors, and we've had some excellent results. I don't know where, I can't see my colleagues here. So Brendan and Juliet are doing a great job. Juliet is there. So we are developing that. We're working with companies, and we've had some fantastic results in mice to show that the tyrosine levels come down by 60-70%. Okay, and we're also working with companies. We're now also working with Moderna in terms of the mRNA. So mRNA means if you give mRNA injection, the liver will make normal HGD. Okay, and there's no question of having high tyrosine because you've now got normal HGD in your liver, and therefore you will have low homogenic acid and low tyrosine as well at the same time. So I know two groups have already successfully done gene therapies in mice. The challenge is to do it in humans and not worry about causing problems like cancer and things like that, because of all kinds of things. And these are the people who are going to take it on going forward, and the supportive act there. And that really is a summary of the giants of medicine who have worked on this problem for a very long time. And we are lucky that we've had an opportunity to get involved in this and do our little bit. And I hope you enjoyed the story of alkapniuria and how it led to other things as well, the important things. Thank you.
So thank you. So yeah, thanks for everyone for coming. I think it's been an absolutely phenomenal 2 days. So I think the last one we had, or the first one, I think was back in 2018. Isn't that right? I think Jim mentioned that, didn't you? Yeah, back in 2018. So hopefully we won't have to wait 6 years before the next one. It's all really dependent on funding. So we have to fundraise to be able to launch these things, because we're a tiny charity. So if all goes well, we might do another one in 2 or 3 years or something like that. We like to do them in Liverpool, because obviously this is really the home of where we've been doing all our work for the past 20 years, and that's where we have the National AKU Centre and the research team and everything and all that. And also it's kind of less expensive for us because we know the area well and everything. But to tell you what's coming up, so we're currently fundraising to do a scientific workshop next year. We try and do one, I think we've managed to do one about every 18 months on average. The last one we did was in Slovakia. Was it Slovakia? Bratislava, that's right, a year ago. And before that we did one in Brussels, and before that there was the pandemic, so obviously we did nothing for all those years. But we're hoping to do one next year, so we're currently fundraising for that. And the scientific workshops, we try to do them hybrid, which we haven't managed for this one. But the scientific workshops are generally done in an educational academic establishment, and they're very well set up for hybrid things. So if we do one next year, it will be probably in Liverpool at the university. And then, as patients, you're all welcome, either to attend or whatever, or to join online and stuff. And they're really interesting because what we do is, you've seen a bit some of the research today, but we bring together scientists from all around the world, so that there's obviously the group, Wendy Introne and her team at the NIH, who've been studying AKU now for 25 years and stuff, and they're absolutely amazing. There's also a group in Brussels, who do some really good work, kind of preclinical work, on alkaptonuria, looking at new therapies, and we invite people from really all over the world, so that's really interesting. And that's a great way of keeping track of all the advances, like on tyrosine inhibitors and the work that Juliet is doing, and Brendan, and all the different people. So that's the next plan. For UK patients, we will also try and do a UK workshop, maybe next year or the year after, again, dependent on the funding we managed to get, But you'll have seen, I think things are pretty hopeful, I think, for AKU. One of the things that I was explaining when we did a little video interview just earlier on is that the study of rare diseases is important for the rare disease, but also for understanding kind of human biology more widely, And a lot of the discoveries that they're making on alkaptonuria here in Liverpool have wider implications, so that's really important, So thanks everyone for coming. Do stay in touch. If you've got any questions, my email address, it's nick@akusociety.org. Particularly if you're trying to get access to nitisinone in countries where you can't get it, we'll really do our best to help you. There's a generics company that we're in touch with in Cambridge. I think I've told a number of you who have this donation scheme and all that, which is really important. But we'll do our best, and thank you very much for attending, and have a great journey back. Thank you.